All right, I think we are live. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for this very special session. Bore out of the civil unrest in the wake of the devastating murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others, we at Or Group took a step back and thought a lot about what role do we have to play in this, and how can we support in this time of much needed change. And admittedly, this is not our collective area of expertise, and yet we recognize that we have a real responsibility to impart change and make a difference where we can. And we realize the best way that we can help advance the dialogue externally is to pull together experts in the field and step back and listen. And so this webinar was designed as part of a dual series. The next one is actually coming up in a few weeks on October 7th. There is more to follow on that shortly. But today's session in particular will explore the importance of building inclusive environments and what it takes to hire and retain diverse talent. Our featured speakers are going to share their perspectives and offer insights in building a sector that values and advances the tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am Shaby Rosales. I will be moderating today's session. I'm the head of HR at Or Group. I've been there for about 4 years. After a long stint in doing HR and private equity. And I am really excited by the folks that we have on the line here today. I'll start with Tamika Mason. Tamika joins us from Building for Mission. It's an organization which she founded that focuses on partnering with organizations across multiple sectors that seek to center people development and equity in their talent practices. So as the executive director, Tamika works with leaders on their READY principles and talent strategies. READY, as we know, is race, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And she has a long career in both the for-profit and nonprofit space and is a leading voice in the DEI space, including her work featured in Year Up's Equity in the Center publication, Awake to Woke to Work, Building a Race Equity Culture, which we'll talk about in detail later on. And I'm happy that she's here because she and her team have been working with us at Or Group over the past several months as we've been looking to build upon our existing core values. And I have to say it's been, and Tamika, I don't say this too often, I try to as much as I can, but it's been such a transformative experience. And I really value your insight and your expertise in this. And I'm grateful that you're here today. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then Wendi, who is on my left, I don't know where she stands on your screen, but Wendi Safstrom is the executive director at the SHRM Foundation, Society for Human Resource Management, for anyone that is not familiar. That is the philanthropic arm of SHRM, which is very exciting. And as the executive director, Wendi leads the development and implementation of SHRM Foundation's programmatic development and marketing communication strategies, as well as its efforts around DEI in the workplace. Wendi also has an extensive background in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors as well, having held several leadership positions at the National Restaurant Association and the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation. And fun fact, Wendi actually hired my husband to go work at the NRAF 5 years ago, I think.
Right, his cover letter was beautiful. I mentioned that before. Beautiful. It's a great story. Yep, I did.
Exactly. So I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful that you're here as well. And just a few housekeeping tips before we get started. I have some questions lined up to get the conversation going, but we have reserved some time at the end for open Q&A. So please do use the Q&A function that is down at the bottom of your screens. We do have a chat window, but reserve that for like tech troubleshooting and any other sort of immediate issues that come up, and use the Q&A for questions. And I will keep watch of that as we go along. And then one other thing, this webinar is being recorded, and we will share a copy of this recording, plus the documents and the materials that you'll see here shared today. We'll follow up with an email for everyone that was able to join us. And then for anyone else, we will house a copy of this recording and the subsequent resources on our website, and we'll share links to that as well. All right, let's get started. Wendi and Tamika, what do you say? Okay, so I think we can all assume that diversity, equity, and inclusion are inherently good, right? But let's open by setting the stage a little bit. So Tamika, I'll start with you. How do you define diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So glad you asked. We get this all the time.
Diversity is really about who's in the room. Any organization or team is comprised of individuals, and those individuals carry many dimensions of their own identity. And so oftentimes I hear folks use diversity as a placeholder for people of color. And we generally advise that, if you mean Black people or Latinx people, just mention that. Diversity really is a word that comprises what are the different dimensions of identity that are present in a particular group of people within an organization or a team. And then equity really is, if I were to sum it up, it's really about making sure that people have access to what they need. It's different from equality, where equality is everyone gets the same thing. And equity is not that. Equity takes into account the long historical inequities that are just in our environments, our country, our world, particularly the history of inequities by race, by gender, and other dimensions of identity. And so equity is really making sure that, given that people need different things because people aren't starting out at the same place. And so let's make sure we're getting folks what they need to really thrive in our environment. I will also say equity has a lot to do with outcomes and wanting to make sure that with any policy, with any program, that there's not a particular group or dimension of, or folks who share a certain dimension of identity that are consistently having desperate outcomes as the rest of the organization or the rest of the individuals have. And then lastly, inclusion. Inclusion is really about the individuals that are in a room and the many different dimensions of identity that they carry. Do they feel a part of the group? Do they feel a part of the team? Do they have a seat at the table? They're not just on the team, but they feel like their voice and their perspective and their work is really valued. So that at a high level is how I would describe the differences between diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. It's very helpful. And I think also we had talked about possibly adding in a glossary that we can include at the end of this when we send out the follow-up. So thank you for that. It was very helpful. Wendi, I'll call over to you in terms of thinking about, I sort of hate using the term business case, but in terms of thinking like high-level benefits of having an inclusive workplace and an environment for a diverse team. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what are some of the benefits?
Sure, and I'm just going to answer this question from a for-profit and a non-for-profit organizational perspective. I sit in a unique spot where I lead a 501c3, and then our membership base, we have over 300,000 members who are HR professionals who are really on the employer side across the country. We help business people and HR professionals build inclusive workplaces and environments. So I'm going to answer the question really from both perspectives if I could. And ultimately, I think the benefits of having an inclusive workplace culture in particular ultimately then lend themselves to doing good business. Organizations, both for-profit and not-for-profit, can do good for others by doing well in business. And so an inclusive workplace and environment or an inclusive workplace culture yield several things in terms of benefits, right? Increased productivity, increased creativity, increased profit, improved employee engagement, reduced turnover. It can help improve a company's reputation. It gives you the opportunity to engage people with a really wider range of skill sets and improve your overall cultural insight for your organization. And there, you mentioned a business case. There are a number of reasons or cases as to why inclusive workplace environments and cultures and a diverse team really matter, right? There's first is something we would describe as a moral or social justice case. It really lends itself to saying that each person has value to contribute, and we have to address, especially in our role as HR professionals and leaders within organizations, barriers and historical factors that have led to unfair conditions for marginalized populations. So from a moral and social perspective, nonprofits are largely created to improve society. Our whole mission foundation is to help HR professionals lead positive social change in the workplace, right? And as such, I think that our teams need to be diverse, inclusive, and equitable. There's also a business case or an economic case, and that's really based on the idea or thought that organizations who tap into diverse talent pools are stronger and more efficient. And in preparing for this webinar, I actually saw a study. It's from the Center for American Progress that finds workplace discrimination against employees based on race, gender, sexual orientation costs businesses an estimated $64 billion with a B, right, dollars annually. And so that amount actually represents the annual estimated cost of losing and replacing more than 2 million American workers who lose their job every year due to what they feel is perhaps unfair treatment and discrimination. So in this instance, organizations should really become more diverse and inclusive because it makes better economic sense to leverage different pools of talent of different populations. And then there's a market case, right? That says that organizations will better serve their customers if they reflect the diversity of their market base. And in the nonprofit arena, I would say the clients are our customers, and our clients would like to see themselves represented in the organizations that best serve them. I also look at donors as customers, and organizations and clients can benefit from resources of tapping into those diverse groups. And then ultimately, what's more, the organizations who have diverse leadership are more likely to understand the needs of that more diverse client base. And increasingly so, certainly our employee populations or our workforces are growing increasingly diverse as well. And then we had mentioned outcomes earlier when we just started the call. The outcome or the results or the ROI case really lends itself to the fact that diverse teams lead to better output, right? So a diverse group of problem solvers, they outperform groups of the best individuals at solving problems. So diverse nonprofit organizations and that diversity of perspectives within them really lead to better solutions and a better social case or a better social place.
Thank you. That is very helpful and very comprehensive. And there was actually a question that came through while you were talking of, can we share the link to that study that you mentioned? And I said that we'll follow up and include a copy of that in the follow-up email. So thank you for that.
Great, sure.
And then maybe bringing it back to, I mean, a lot of the folks on the line today, I'm sure many of them are HR professionals, which for me is very heartwarming as a seasoned HR professional.
Right.
But for the most part, they are going to be our target audience for the most part, and the people that we work with exclusively are in the nonprofit sector. So maybe a question for you both. Wendy, you touched on this for sure, but Tamika, if you have other thoughts on this as well, why is DEI particularly important for the nonprofit sector? I mean, I think you touched on that a little bit in working for the greater good, but.
Yeah, oh my goodness. I think Wendy touched on that in so many different ways as she communicated. You know what, if I were to be fully transparent, I would say I don't think DEI is particularly more important in the nonprofit sector than any other sector. I do think because organizations in the nonprofit sector profess to really center some group that they provide additional resources to, that they want to support, that they're advocating for. And so I think it hurts more when individuals in nonprofit and organizations that are in the nonprofit sector don't really understand and value diversity, equity, inclusion. But from the cost saving, from the having people in your organization representing those you sell your services to or you support in some type of way, for all the reasons that Wendy shared, I think there's just loss that we experience when we don't really leverage the benefits that come from building a diverse and equitable and inclusive workforce.
I completely agree with that. I completely agree. Wendy, any other thoughts from you?
I think what Tamika just said that's a nice kind of summary of other things that it's really a theme that I've been hearing too, right? I think it's incredibly important, and I think increasingly it's become more and more important to run a not-for-profit like a business. We have to approach how we manage finances, how we manage people, how we manage projects and work. We have to think like a business in order for us to stay in business, and that means, staffing and developing a workforce accordingly. And if we are proponents of DE&I, certainly I think that our cultures and our workforces and our workplace should be reflective of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, we at Org Group, I'll say, collectively, a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, we changed our tagline. and we changed it to fundraising innovation, because that
Yeah.
for us encompasses really a lot of what we do and really everything we do. And we came to the conclusion, and this is actually at Tamika's guidance of, you know, we have to answer the so what of like, okay, you have a DEI initiative, you have this as a core value, like what does this mean to you, right? What does this mean to you as an employer, as an individual, as a professional, et cetera? And we came away with, we're not actually living up to that idea, that ideal of fundraising innovation, because innovation does not happen in a homogeneous environment. And so
Right.
without these ideals of diversity or being inclusive or having an equitable workspace, we are never going to actually achieve that tagline. So that was for us, it was a real aha moment of course, right? Of course this makes sense. And unless you take a step back and really think about it and have someone sort of poking and prodding for you to think about it and asking those questions, it doesn't come naturally to just think of this on your own, right? You have to really put some thought to it. So thank you both for that. That was helpful. Tamika, I want to get into your work a little bit. So at Building for Mission, you partner with organizations to develop talent strategies and practices that transform how they attract, develop, and retain talent, which for me is the most important thing. So can you talk to us a little bit about your work and how you tackle some of these complex challenges with the organizations that you work with and partner with?
Yeah, that's a really great framing. Thank you for that. I'd say, you know, at a high level, the expertise that the Building for Mission team brings really is at the intersection of three prongs. We bring deep expertise in READY, so race, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and both on the learning concepts and training, but then also just how do you implement that and live that out and practice it at a day-to-day basis, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about today. And then we bring deep expertise in just human capital, talent management practices. All of us have had some type of organization development or HR or have led HR departments. So we know what it's like to have to implement things and build buy-in and make it simple and those types of things. And then the third prong would be organization development, because so much of ready work and so much of talent work really requires change management. And so when it comes to attracting and really developing and retaining talent, one of the places we start, and I think this kind of comes from our OD lens, is just what is the challenge and what is the opportunity? You know, if we're able to really service with organizations, what is the challenge that you're experiencing? And or what is the opportunity that maybe you're not seeing, and how do we kind of expand some options for you? Then we're able to really have a thoughtful plan and path forward. And so if I were to give an example around recruiting, oftentimes people are like, oh, we can't find diversity in our hires. So then I have to say, okay, well, what do we mean by diversity? Are we meaning that you want more women? Are you meaning that you want more Latinx staff or indigenous or, you know, people of color or African Americans? And so just really trying to get specific around, you know, what is the diversity that you need to have? Is it that you have it and you're not growing it? Is it you're attracting diversity within a particular functional area that you're experiencing challenge in? But just defining a little bit more where what challenge you're experiencing and where in your pipeline. Is it because people aren't even applying? Because then that's a marketing issue. Is it because people aren't making it past the phone screen? Well, what are we doing, you know, in that phone screen, and how are we assessing? And so it really is helping fine tune what is the problem so that we can really have thoughtful solutions and ideas around how to make progress. And then the last thing I would say, and this kind of comes from our own values related to Ready as an organization, is we really don't come in as the experts. Like, we know everything. We're not that consulting type of company. Our focus is on really leveraging the experience of the talent within. And so just our process around doing that is to really elevate and highlight voices within the organization and be thought partners as the organization is trying to go through the solutioning process. So I know that's a little broad, but at a high level, that's an example overall in an example of how we approach really supporting organizations with just, you know, attracting, developing, and retaining talent.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I mentioned this, I mentioned this earlier on this call, but I mentioned this in another webinar that we conducted a couple weeks ago. one of the questions came up that was like, how do you even start something like this? And like, if this is important to you, how do you get started? And the way that I answered it was like, call an expert, call someone that can actually help you, call Building for Mission, they will help. And it's so true. I mean, it's so true. The way that you all operate with us, I mean, I've even seen it just for ourselves. I can only speak from the I and talk about my own experience working with you. It really is transformative and helpful, again, to have someone there that really helps you think through and work through some of these heady issues. So thank you for that. Wendi, I will turn it over to you. SHRM and the SHRM Foundation are dedicated to building a world of work that works for all. And I had to write this down so that I made sure I got it right, because I mean, it's such a tongue twister. Try saying. but building a world of work that works for all, I mean, that's a really big mission, right? As part of that mission, you conduct very important research that, frankly, I use quite a bit. And some of your recent findings, I want to touch on these. They indicate that more than half of Black American workers believe they've been treated unfairly in the workplace due to their race. You also found that people with disabilities experience unemployment at twice the rate of other working adults, and yet only 13% of workplaces in the US have disability-specific inclusion initiatives. So, I mean, I'd love to hear, based on those things, how is the SHRM Foundation helping employers reverse these trends and build more diverse and inclusive workplaces?
I had this conversation when it comes to talking about what our mission is, really building a world of work that works for all and helping HR professionals lead positive social change. We really went through a transformation. I came on board about 3 years ago, and our CEO Johnny C. Taylor Jr. also came in about 3 years ago. And together our boards worked to develop a strategic plan and the purpose, vision, and mission that we have today. And in hindsight, in today's world, looking back at the vision, the mission we created about a year and a half ago, I don't know if we had foresight, we knew where things were headed, I don't know. We were fortunate enough to have this as part of our remit from the very beginning, right? And so SHRM is really the world's largest HR professional society. So SHRM is our parent organization, and they are a go-to for people like you, Shaby, to look for tools and resources to help elevate the profession of HR, to elevate the individual HR professional, elevate perhaps what others think and perceive HR's role is or could or should be. And we work very closely with SHRM to help, as you say, reverse those trends through ongoing learning. We have, again, as I mentioned, 300,000 members across the globe. Most of them are here domestically. They love to network and learn and are actually competitive with one another to a degree, which is good. Healthy competition is good. So we really help discuss what's going on through that learning that we offer through both the foundation and through SHRM, and just conversation and collaboration. Really, we're ultimately working toward building that more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. And in fact, SHRM this summer launched, and we'll put this as part of the resources we're going to send afterward. We'll send links to all of this. Our Together Forward at Work initiative. And again, because we believe that in this particular time of, quite frankly, division and gridlock, that organizations have an opportunity, and I would say an obligation or responsibility, to set examples and truly lead that positive social change and lead with being civil and civil to one another. And so we firmly believe we can help change the world by changing our workplaces. We spend so much time doing work. I was going to say, we used to say in the workplace, but in the workplaces are very, perhaps scattered at the moment, right? So, but by changing the world and the way we work and how we work with one another, we can truly change the world. And so this Together Forward at Work initiative is SHRM's call to action that's designed to help the business community in this instance, but certainly we have HR professionals who are members of SHRM that represent or work for nonprofits, right? Adopt specific actions that really lead to real change and help drive and give them tools and resources to help drive and recognize bias and inequity from the workplace. SHRM also established a Commission on Racial Equity. This is a coalition that SHRM established when they launched Together Forward at Work. And this is a group of business leaders and academics, B&I professionals, HR professionals who are really committed to coming together to drive action. It's one thing to say you're committed to something. It's an entirely different thing to actually do something about it. So they're helping us drive action. They're recommending solutions that are incredibly relevant today in today's world. But again, will yield hopefully that positive change. But I'll say that our commitment to equality and inclusion in the workplace is nothing new. It's now probably never been more critical and in people's faces, certainly to help provide assistance in getting it right. It's really long been our collective mission between SHRM and the Foundation to help understand bias and root out bias in the workplace, to understand the implications of inequities, to stand with people and different groups who have perhaps traditionally been locked out of the workplace. The foundation actually focuses on creating tools and resources to help HR professionals recruit and retain untapped pools of talent. And those resources are all available and accessible free of charge. So we'll send you links to that. We have training and resources again for veterans and members of the military community, but more specifically, resources for HR professionals to get to know those folks in the communities in which they work and live and how to best recruit and retain those individuals. We have a Getting Talent Back to Work initiative, which also aims to help individuals with a criminal record or formerly incarcerated re-enter the workforce. We have an Employing Abilities at Work program, which really focuses on helping HR professionals strengthen their skills and their abilities to hire, develop, advance, and retain. And I say retain because it's so critically important. It's one thing to hire, it's another entirely different thing to retain and develop those folks along the way. That's designed to help people with disabilities in the workplace. And so I'm also really excited about this next program that we have in partnership with SHRM. We've recommitted and we're refreshing our commitment from a programmatic perspective and an outreach perspective to help develop the next generation of HR professionals and leaders. There's not been a better time, I don't think, for HR to lead. We are on the front lines in so many different ways, but we are on the front lines of engaging with employers and employees and managing all the things that come along with it. And so there is not, I don't think has been a better time since I can think of to engage people who want to make a difference in really deliberately and purposely picking HR as a job or as a career. So we're really excited about that. All of this work is really new within the last year and a half, and we're only going to be increasing our support and lend in those efforts.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And I will say, I mean, as an HR professional, you hit the nail on the head on so many things in terms of SHRM being the ultimate resource. I cannot say enough about that. But this idea, I want to call back to something that you said, this idea of retention being like retaining employees is the most critical thing. I mean, it goes back to what you were saying at the top of the hour related to the cost of having to replace employees. You know, there's an opportunity cost there. There's an actual cost. I mean, there's a lot of things that are implications with that. And so when we talk about DEI, it's interesting because that is the, like, maybe the like classic or traditional sort of formation of the lettering, but we've seen it in so many ways. I mean, I even said this, Tamika, in your intro, like ready, like centering and like bringing race equity to the forefront of the letters, right, of the acronym. I've seen it as IDEA, where inclusion is really at the forefront of the acronym. I mean, there is this idea that retention really needs to be, it's not just about attracting talent. It's not just about hiring. It's not just about like providing specific benefits. It's really about retaining and creating an environment that is inclusive and equitable and diverse, that people want to stay in and really, really thrive. And you said it so well. I could not say it better myself.
That's what, you know, it's, while it's an HR's professional or an employment manager, recruiter to find those people to bring into the organization, that's when it really takes the commitment of it from the very top down. I don't like that phrase, but of the entirety of the organization. So when that individual comes into your place of business, you understand how to function and live and work with one another. Certainly, it's not just HR's job, it's HR's role, and I think senior leadership's and managers' role to help foster this inclusive culture. So it doesn't stop, right? When you hire somebody, say, I checked that box, I hired a veteran today, right? What did you do to develop and retain that veteran? That's where you really see the rubber meet the road in that instance.
Right, completely. And we've been doing, it's funny that you said that, we've been doing a lot of recruiting as part of our work. So part of our work in the philanthropic space is to help is to help either serve in an outsourced HR capacity or recruit where needed and add talent where needed. And something we've come up against is really thinking through hiring for culture. And it's not about cultural fit, but about cultural add. And like, what is actually going to enhance and add to the culture? And so this idea of creating an inclusive and equitable workforce really has everything to do with culture, right? It has everything to do with retention. It has everything to do with bringing someone in that's going to really make a difference and really impart value in a meaningful and substantive way. So thank you, I really appreciate that. Tamika, I want to bring it back to you. A while back, you were involved with the creation of Equity in the Center's seminal publication, Awake to Woke to Work, which I love the title of that. And I will say has been extremely instrumental and helpful in Org Group as we've continued our equity learning journey. But can you tell us a little bit about that publication and how it can support social change organizations in building inclusive cultures?
Yeah, I can. One thing that I think is really worth highlighting that the publication did is really just center race in the conversation. And obviously, race is one dimension of diversity. There's so many dimensions of identity when we think about our gender, when we think about our class, when we think about our geography, where we were grown up and born. However, we feel like within the workplace, race has really gotten lost and in some ways has been overlooked when it comes to actually making real change in the workplace. And as we talk about diversity, we just, focus more on the differences and how we bring that in. And we don't fully understand the historical impact of race. And, I'd love to just share a couple of stats because I know that, we just don't learn these types of things in school or just fully understand how this impacts our day-to-day life and work. But the poverty rate for Black Americans is 20.8%, which is more than double that of white. And if you look at other racial groups, they fall within the span of those two bookends. The median net worth of white households is about 10 times the median net worth of Black households. And the same thing in terms of other racial groups falling within the span of those bookends. And then lastly, from resumes, white names on resumes receive 50% more callbacks for interviews. And when you think about, school systems that are funded by who lives in that neighborhood and how much people make and how that impacts child's education, on and on, there are real deeply rooted challenges that we have faced in our country that does impact the workforce. It does impact the pool of talent that's there. It does impact the day-to-day challenges and lived experiences that our workforce and the individuals in our workforce are experiencing. And so one of the things I love about the Awake Woke Work framework is it really just said, let's center race and how do we really understand race? How do we understand its implications on the workplace? And how do we really help organizations understand where are they and what's a framework for them to begin to think about how do we make progress? And so I was actually a part of, they pulled together a number of different racial equity practitioners and people who were leading it in their organizations, which I was one of those people at the time, to really talk about what are the challenges we're experiencing, what has been helpful for us to just share best practices. And when we were first having a conversation of just trying to bucket, how to make progress, it was initially it's continuum. And then we realized no, this is cyclical because as you might gain more diversity here, but then this thing happens and you need to increase your workforce there. And so just, the Awake Woke work, the way it's framed is there's these three big buckets. And it's a helpful frame for us to think about where we are and the progress we can make and really being progressive as it comes to specifically racial equity. But it's not a continuum. We kind of do a little bit of a cycle. And so Awake is really about the representation. what is the demographics, what is the racial demographics of our whole staff, of our leadership, et cetera. And as we begin to have that diversity within, racial diversity within our workforce, we then can think about how woke are we? What are the experiences of inclusion? People are here in our environment. Do they feel like they have a voice? Do they feel like the culture is so strong in white dominant norms that they feel othered on their teams, or they feel like they can't bring their best self or their most authentic self to the day-to-day work? And so how does the organization really unpack that and understand that, and really build a culture that truly allows folks from different racial backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds to thrive and feel a part of? And then the work is really around the external and internal work of the organization, and how are our values related to racial equity really reflected in the work that we do. And so I think by having 3 big categories, it's a helpful framing, because in my experience, some organizations, especially nonprofits, just focus on the work. We're doing the work, so we're doing racial equity, you know? We're living our values because we're serving these populations, and, you know, given the populations we're serving, we're doing our job. And they overlook some of the internal cultural aspects of their environment that is not allowing people from all racial backgrounds to thrive. And so I know that's a long explanation, but just, you know, that's some of the things I think this publication does to really just help organizations understand, what do we talk about when we're talking about racial equity, and where are we at, and how do we make progress? And it even speaks to probably about 8 to 10 different levers that are really important, that either can accelerate or can decelerate the work. And so I highly recommend that publication for anyone who hasn't seen it or been introduced to it.
Thank you. No, that was great. And I love that you're like, that was a lot. I mean, we could have a whole webinar just on Awake to Work, I think. And for anyone asking, we will share, again, we will share all of the resources in the follow-up to this call. So we will share that as well, link to that as well. You know, I want to get into, you both have touched on this, but I want to get into really speaking to the sector, the nonprofit sector specifically. So as a full service sort of fundraising, recruiting, nonprofit strategy firm, we at Org Group think about the composition of the social sector constantly. I mean, this comes up all the time, specifically in recruiting, but also in like managing teams and leading teams and that sort of thing. So I want to start by examining some of the stats related to the nonprofit workforce. So for example, 90% of nonprofit CEOs are white, 90%, 9 out of 10. Development professionals are overwhelmingly white, 83%, and female. So they are white women, female, and that is at 70%. The average tenure of a development director, as an example, hovers around 18 months. So how do we as a field, I mean, listening to all of this, how do we as a field and as individual organizations recruit and retain a more diverse workforce? I mean, like, where do we even start? And Wendi, I'll pitch that, I guess, to you first.
Sure. It's so interesting. I read these stats again in preparing for the webinar, and while not exact, these demographics are also very reflective of who we are as HR professionals.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, white female, the late 40s, 50s, maybe from the Midwest. And so what we're doing at the foundation, and I was an HR professional, so I can say that. What we're doing as an organization is working really hard, as I talked about some of this next gen HR program, to really diversify the cadre cohort, or the groups of individuals who pursue HR for all the reasons we've talked about, right? Reflective of your customer base, reflective of your employee base, bringing different kinds of ideas, certainly, and especially in your role as an HR professional, to the table. And you know, I was thinking about this too, both in the HR space and the nonprofit space. It's been my experience, a lot of people kind of fall into HR, right? They become HR, maybe professionals, kind of a security circuitous or roundabout way. Maybe they came from a different area of the organization. And I don't think we as HR professionals do a great job of talking about the opportunities in our profession as we could or should. And I think the same could be said, and I say that because when I first graduated in my first earlier professional career, I kind of fell into HR. I got into it and I thought, this is a great opportunity to make a tremendous difference. And then in the space of nonprofit management development, I too don't think we necessarily do a great job, because now I'm on the other side, right? I'm an executive director who's ultimately accountable for development and programmatic functions. I don't think we do a great job of telling our story as nonprofit professionals and the opportunities we have, again, to make such a tremendous difference. And so I think diversifying who we recruit from, how we talk about ourselves as HR professionals or nonprofit professionals, really getting in at the collegiate level or talking to people or considering career changes is really going to make a difference. And so that's part of the reason why we're focused on that next Gen HR program, is to do that. And I think we have a similar opportunity now, so more perhaps than ever, to really lead with opportunity, drive, affect, and implement change within organizations and truly change people's lives by affecting culture. And you can do that through HR, and you can do that through a nonprofit professional. We want people to consider those as professions and start talking about it at the earliest of stages, perhaps, as someone's thinking through what they want to do when they grow up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tamika, any thoughts on that?
I would be remiss to not take this opportunity to just speak to just the fact that racism exists at 4 different levels. And I just think understanding that and understanding that context is really helpful when we zoom in on these very specific recruitment efforts that we're seeking to have within an organization. And so, you know, the 4 levels, racism exists at the individual level. So our own thoughts, beliefs, internalized, et cetera, which we all, people of color, myself as a Black woman, white folks, you know, anybody, you know, we have our own internalized perspectives around ourselves and about race. And then there's the interpersonal, which is around our interactions with others. That's where bias, unconscious bias, and conscious bias, there's all kinds of bias out there, as well as there's good conscious bias. Like I'm biased towards everyone who went to UVA, and I'm not abashed about that because that's my alma mater. But that's also where microaggressions show up in that interpersonal level. Then there's the institutional, so that's our policies, practices, our recruitment systems, et cetera, and then systemic. And this stat really speaks to a systemic thing. And sometimes when we see the systemic thing, we can say, well, you know, what can we do? We can't change the pipeline. Like, look, every other organization is dealing with that. And I think it's really important for us to educate ourselves on just understanding these things so that we can think about what are the things we can do within the sphere of our control, given these different pieces. And so one of the things I shared earlier was just, what is the problem? What are we experiencing? And so if we don't have the dimensions of identity, the dimensions of diversity of folks who are applying to our roles, that really speaks to just what is our marketing, right? What are do people in the various communities that we're seeking to attract, do they know what we're offering? Are we leveraging outlets that really reach those communities and let them know about the great opportunity? When they look at our website or when they are interacting with face-to-face with our team, what are we communicating about our values as it relates to diversity? And all of those things really do matter when it comes to attracting diversity for various roles, you know, more men or more people of color within, I know this particular sector is around development. I also think we need to rethink our minimum requirements and expectations for some of these roles, and understand as we are crafting the job description and putting together our rubrics, how much of some of these things people must come in and they must have this experience, and which of these aspects are trainable. And so Are we undervaluing the lens that people bring, given the dimensions of their identity, and overvaluing you've written X type of proposals before, or you've raised X amount of dollars before? And so just really being thoughtful about what is the diversity of lens and experience someone is really bringing to this team, that they can learn some of these other things that in fact some of these other people on our team already have, for us to really overall reach our goals when it comes to the clients we seek to serve, the money we seek to raise, and what we're trying to do externally. And so that is just the beginning of kind of how we would approach supporting organizations that are really struggling with this challenge of attracting and recruiting more folks across different dimensions of diversity.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I love what you said right at the end there. I mean, I was talking about this with a client the other day. We were coaching them through their own sort of job description and how they wanted to post for the job and the parameters that they set that were like the must-haves. And they were like, we really want to recruit for someone that has held this specific title before, but we do want to make sure we have a diverse pool. And it's like, okay, well, let's like elevate this conversation just a bit and talk about the barriers for people receiving those titles and who is able to have a seat at the table and who isn't. I mean, it was like a really heady conversation of like, I need to unpack this with you because what you're saying and what you're saying are two different things. And it wasn't until that moment that they had their own sort of light bulb moment of like, maybe holding that title isn't actually as necessary as I thought maybe it was originally. So thank you for that. That's helpful. Okay, I want to skip through. We have a couple more questions, but I also want to get to some of these great questions that I'm seeing pop up in the Q&A. I know people are itching to get their questions answered. But I will end with this. If an organization is new to DEI work, right? If this is if you have to do something, but you don't know where to start, where should they start? And what are the typical barriers that they might have to overcome? And Tamika, maybe I'll start with you on that. And then Wendi will go to you with final thoughts on that. And then we'll go to the Q&A.
Yep.
Yeah, if you're starting out, I think there's two things that are really important. One is, you shared it already, Shaby, find a partner to really walk you through this work. We don't have blind spots often because we choose to. We are well-intentioned leaders who want to build strong teams, build strong diverse teams, et cetera. And so I would definitely say, find a really good external thought partner as you all are embarking on this journey. The second thing I would say, and sometimes an external thought partner can support you in this, and sometimes you do it even before you find a thought partner, is I always like to say, ready to what end? Why DEI? And so, as an organization, beginning to think through, given our mission, given our services, given our work, why does it even matter? Because until we really understand that and can articulate that and can hear different voices on our team, maybe someone else mentioned something around why it matters that never really dawned on me, because that really is the starting place around what you value, and being able to write your vision statement around DEI and ready work, and then also how you implement and assess your internal organization around how are we doing against what's important to us given the work that we do. And so I would start with those two places, and then, good luck as you're continuing on your work and your journey.
Thank you for that. And Wendi, I'll turn it over to you. Same question. I mean, you could even speak from your own experience of having to lead this at the foundation.
Mm-hmm. I would say that a DEI strategy, we talk about that, and that's how we've actually, no pressure, right, to be the Chief Human Resource Officer for the world's largest professional HR society, right? No pressure. You're really leading by example, right?
You set the tone.
I know, right? And Sean knows that, trust me. So I think the way we talk about it here is that a DEI strategy is not just an HR issue, it is a strategic business issue. And Tamika said it, efforts that should be reflected in your organization's mission, vision, and values. It should be threaded through your strategic plans and really cascaded throughout the organization. This is really hard work. And again, if you're really Our CEO was actually interviewed in a magazine recently that I was just reading in preparation for this. And the title is, "If you're not, as an organization, where you want to be with your DEI program, here's why." And he asked the question, do you have the right person leading those efforts? And I would say in many organizations, and I've seen this in other places, when a DEI program is getting up and running, or the CEO or other senior leadership team say, we're committed to this, we're going to make it happen, they maybe choose someone internally to head it up. And right, it could be somebody typically who is happens to be a member of the diverse community in which the company is trying to reach, or someone who feels really passionate about the issue, but that individual could be taken off the team that they're on perhaps and put in charge of DEI, or they're given the DEI assignment to help lead that strategy in addition to their day job. So, I think what CEOs and executive directors really need to know and understand and value is that building diversity, it's hard work, and inclusion is harder, but what they do understand is the fastest way to screw up an initiative, just like any other business initiative, is to choose the wrong person to design your strategy and operationalize it. And so, working with people like Tamika, working with HR professionals, if you've got a larger organization, you may have different areas of your organization who can, hire people permanently to do this kind of work. Value those skill sets. Deliberately search for those people to help you create and implement that strategy, just like you do any other kind of business initiative or strategy, because it will ultimately contribute to better business within your organization. You have to take it seriously.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yep.
That's very helpful. Okay, so I want to get to some of these questions. There's a lot of good questions in here, and I think, in reading through them, we won't be able to get to all of them, but I think that we have in some way, just even in the conversation that we've had. But we'll start with one about microaggressions or unconscious or implicit bias in the workplace. And Tamika, maybe I'll pitch this one to you. This person is asking for some advice on solutions or best practices on ways to listen to reports of microaggressions in the workplace or implicit bias or whatever, without worry of consequence or reprisal or retaliation, right? Or not being believed even. And I think that there's something about microaggressions where there is this psychological dilemma of, did what I just heard or did what I just experienced, was that a microaggression? Did I hear what I just think I heard? And do I have the emotional bandwidth and energy to even address it, right? I mean, I think there's this dilemma for a lot of people. But can you speak to that a little bit? Maybe, just give a very 2-second overview of what even is a microaggression, and then maybe how to address it for HR professionals. And Wendi, I don't know if you also have thoughts on that too.
Yeah, a microaggression is, I guess at the simplest form is a word, a comment, or behavior that really is stereotypes someone's identity, and it creates this othering, and it in some ways dehumanizes that particular individual without realizing it. So it can be small examples. If I'm one of just 2 African Americans in an environment, someone on my team can consistently call me the other Black woman. No, I'm not that Black woman. I'm Tamika, Black woman. And so that's, an example of a microaggression, or just, not pronouncing someone's name right and asking again to really get the pronunciation, and doing what you can to remember. It's oh, that's too much, just what's your nickname, and giving that person a nickname, or just, small little examples of microaggressions. And in order to answer that question, I almost would say it from a couple of different lenses. There is more risk for whoever who has experienced that microaggression to be the one to raise it. And so I would like to speak less to that person, because they're taking their own level of risk on whether they're going to raise it and whether people are going to believe them or whether it's going to speak to them. And I'd love to speak to the bystander. So the person who's on the team who is wondering, well, if that person didn't say anything, if they're not offended, it's not a microaggression. We really need bystanders, allies, to speak to it, whether that person was offended or not. I want to name that this is a microaggression, and you know what, we can do better and create that learning experience. It takes the weight off of the person who experienced to have to navigate that. And then, you know, likewise for managers to be able to create training and learning opportunities when an instance happens, to create an environment for people to really understand and build their awareness. And then hopefully that will translate into behavior, and having one-on-one conversations with individuals. I don't know if that fully answers the question, because there's something about listening in there, but if we didn't answer your question, chat it back and tell us if there's some other dimension. But at a high level, that's how I would describe a microaggression and would approach that question.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that a lot. Wendi, I have one for you. This organization is saying, you know, we're a small nonprofit with limited resources. We're predominantly white women, though we serve a predominantly black and brown. We serve predominantly black and brown students. We recognize the imperative to recruit and retain BIPOC candidates. What are the best strategies given our limited resources? I mean, this is HR nightmare, I think, all the time, right? Thinking through, how can I do the most with the least? What can I do? And what are your thoughts on that?
Right. And especially, you know, so many of our members represent small to medium-sized companies.
Yes.
Run into this quite a bit, right? I'm an HR department of 0.5 or 1.2 or whatever, right? You know, I think, and I kind of do this too, outside of this workplace, I find people who are looking to solve similar challenges or problems, if you will, right? And that's why I think finding a professional society, finding a group you can have courageous, comfortable conversations with, and set up, you know, kind of some discussion rules, and to have those important conversations to learn from what others is so incredibly important. And networking, virtual networking, finding a mentor, all those things you hear about. When you're a small organization and you have perhaps less to work with, it's learning from one another's and leveraging the expertise. I guarantee you, if you get 10 people around, you know, in a room, everyone's got something to contribute to the conversation. And I think it's just a matter, if you're not getting it yourself, go out and be proactive about it, right? And find people who are doing. Somebody asked me once, who's your mentor? How do you identify a mentor? I don't say I have a specific mentor. I watch and listen, and I find people who are doing really smart things that are having an impact. And I think that as a small organization, whether it's being a member of SHRM or being a member of a different organization, call on like-minded individuals to learn from one another and have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Mm-hmm. There's a question in here about, you know, can you share examples of a successful DEI implementation at a nonprofit or maybe at a for-profit when it comes to organizational culture? What did they do, and why was it particularly successful? And Tamika, maybe I'll turn that to you as someone that works in this space all the time with organizations and sees that transformation.
Yeah, you know, I think number one is, the one thing I would say is they commit to ongoing learning as well. What does the organization need? What type of learning does the leadership team need? Do people managers need while they're also trying to do the work? They're not so quick to just do solutions. You don't stay too long in just learning, where we're just learning, can't implement yet, we're just learning. So there's something about continuous learning, but then also putting that into action that I think is an important loop that I would share. You know, ownership from leadership. Don't delegate this work to the internal person who's leading it around DEI or your external partner. They're partners to the leadership team, but the leadership team really needs to find a way to own this and incorporate it in their leadership. Would be the other thing that I would mention as well. And I don't know, I know we don't have a lot of time, but someone who wrote the bystander, they had a second comeback, which they basically said, how do you respond? What language do you use? And I just wanted to offer, there's really great feedback guidelines out there, such as IDEA, et cetera, that roughly say, state the situation, state the potential impact, you know, on the individual or individuals around. And I think that one of those feedback models are a really good place to start if you're looking for the language and the structure for how you would approach naming when you see a microaggression happening.
Thank you. And we do not have enough time to get to all of our questions today, but if you can stay on for one more minute, we can do one last one. There was a question here about mentorship, and specifically saying, you know, there's a missing sort of theme and pipeline for senior people of color fundraising professionals looking to move up, and the real thrive there is in mentorship by those people that have come before them, and oftentimes they are older, they are white, they are sometimes women. And they have, this person is saying, I have several mentors in this space, but I know that many of my peers, I am a Black woman, as many of my peers as Black peers, were not supported in seeking mentors. So what is the work being done around those senior leaders who don't look diverse, but need to provide mentorship to people of color? And Wendi, maybe I'll start with you in terms of thinking about mentorship, and you touched a little bit on that, and then Tamika will close out with you.
And just quickly, what we're doing again in this kind of next gen HR space, we surveyed all of the students who are in these programs or going into the programs, and said, what is the one thing we can provide you as a professional society? They said access to a mentor. And we talked about what mentoring means, and how do you actually want to help facilitate that mentor-mentee relationship. I think sometimes people hear the word mentoring or mentorship and it's a bit overwhelming, and you immediately go to, this is tremendous time suck, and I don't know if I can do it, and am I going to be assigned to somebody? But I think outside the box and think differently in terms of what it means to be a mentor and a mentee. And as I mentioned earlier, pay attention and seek out people who are doing really smart things and having an impact, and don't be afraid to ask for help. I guarantee you, the people that you're asking for help likely will be flattered that you're asking and will want to help you be successful. Just be respectful and mindful of their time as well, and keep it a conversation that you would at a networking level. And again, seek those people out. You can't sit back and wait for it to happen to you necessarily.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tamika, any closing thoughts?
I would just say organizations, that is a great strategy. The person who named it, it does help. And, organizations should be conscious of both formal and informal mentorship. So you can help, it can connect the dots for individuals and give opportunities with your network. And sometimes we don't look at as leaders how we make these side relationships just when we're visiting offices, et cetera. If we were to evaluate what's the demographics of those individuals, if they're a lot like our own, we need to diversify and be a little bit more strategic when we think we're building these informal relationships. And that's just something else I've seen organizations just be more intentional about when it comes to mentorship.
Thank you. That was great. And I want to thank you both so much. We are now over time, which I knew was going to happen. And it was funny, in prepping for this call, we had intentionally left the questions very light at the outset because we knew we were going to have a ton of questions on the back end. So sorry we couldn't get to all of them today. We will try as much as we can to maybe answer some of those questions in the follow-up. We will share resources, everything that we talked about today. Wendi, thank you so much for your time, for your insight, for sharing all of your knowledge. Tamika, thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughts and all of your knowledge. And I will talk to you very soon because we're going to keep our work going together. And Wendi, my husband says hello.
I was going to say hi to Matthew for me.
Thank you both. And thank you everyone who was able to join us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.